The Horae, often referred to as the Horae or Hours, are divine beings from Greek mythology who personify the seasons and the passage of time. They are the daughters of Zeus, the king of the gods, and the Titaness Themis, who represents divine law and order. The Horae are closely associated with the concept of time and the orderly progression of the seasons. In ancient Greek mythology, there were typically 3 Horae, though some variations mention more. The first surviving mention of them is in the Iliad, in which Homer gives few specifics except to describe them as the keepers of heaven's gates who also tend to Juno's horses and chariot, roles that seem to vanish later. Beyond Homer's initial reference are a host of sometimes conflicting descriptions giving us a varying number and nature of hours, many of whom still have echoes in art and culture. Who were the Horae? The Horae were important divine beings in Greek religious beliefs and ceremonies. They were often depicted as beautiful, youthful goddesses, usually dressed in robes and sometimes holding symbolic items related to their roles. The concept of the Horae also extended to the natural cycles and the changing of the seasons. Each Horae was believed to govern a specific season: Thallo, associated with spring and new growth; Oxo, linked to summer and ripening; and Carpo, connected to autumn and the harvest. These seasonal associations further emphasize their role in regulating the passage of time and the cyclical nature of life. The Horae of Justice, Homer's contemporary, the Greek poet Hesiod, gave a more detailed account of the Horae in his Theogony, in which Zeus married Themis, the Greek goddess of justice and daughter of Uranus and Gaia. From this marriage, Zeus' II, were born the 3 goddesses, Eunomia, Dike, and Irene, as well as the Fates Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. This is one of the 2 recognized, and very different, triads of the Horae. And with Themis being the personification of order and moral justice in Greek mythology, it's no surprise that these 3 goddesses were seen in a similar light in ancient Greece. This is not to say that these 3 sisters had no associations with the passing seasons or nature. These daughters of Zeus were still seen as being associated with the sky and the heavenly constellations, which makes sense given their connection to the orderly passage of time. And these Horae all generally had an association with spring, with at least a few vague connections between them and plant growth. But these 3 Horae goddesses were much more firmly associated with notions like peace, justice, and good order like their mother Themis. Dis, the aura of moral justice. Dis was the goddess of human justice, legal rights, and fair rulings, who abhorred liars and corruption. Hesiod would expound on this depiction in Works and Days, and it recurs heavily in the works of Sophocles and Euripides in the 5th century BC. Depicted as a maiden of eternal youth, Dis was one of the numerous figures associated with the constellation Virgo. But a more direct legacy came when the Romans copied the ancient Greeks' theological homework, revising Dis as the goddess Justitia, whose image as Lady Justice adorns courthouses across the Western world to this day. Eunomia, the aura of law. Eunomia, on the other hand, was the personification of law and order. Where her sister was concerned with fair rulings according to the law, Eunomia's province was the construction of the law itself, of governance, and the social stability a legal framework provides. She was invoked in numerous sources as a goddess of order in both civil and personal contexts. Notably, she was frequently depicted in ancient Greek art, particularly on Athenian vases as a companion of Aphrodite, as a representation of the importance of lawful obedience in marriage. Irene, the aura of peace. The last of this triad was Irene, or Peace, called Pax in her Roman incarnation. She is commonly depicted as a young woman holding a cornucopia, torch, or scepter. She was worshipped prominently in Athens, particularly after the Athenians defeated Sparta in the Peloponnesian War during the 4th century BC. The city boasted a bronze statue of the goddess holding the infant Plutos, the god of plenty, symbolic of the notion that prosperity survives and grows under the protection of peace. The Horae of the seasons. But there is another, more commonly known triad of Horae also mentioned in both Homeric hymns and the works of Hesiod. And while it's already been said the other triad had a few tenuous associations with spring and plants, Eunomia was associated with green pastures, while Irene often held a cornucopia and was described by Hesiod with the epithet green shoot. This triad leans much more heavily into the idea of the Horae as seasonal goddesses. According to the fabulae of the 1st century scholar Hyginus, this trio of goddesses, Thallo, Carpo, and Oxo, were also considered in Greek mythology as the daughters of Zeus and Themis. And in fact, there have been some attempts to create associations between the two sets of Horae, equating Thallo and Irene. For instance, though Hyginus lists each set of 3 Greek goddesses as separate entities and the notion of the first and second group as somehow overlapping doesn't have a lot of foundation. Unlike their mother, this second group of Horae goddesses had little association with concepts like peace or human justice. Rather, the Greeks saw them as goddesses of the natural world, concerned with the progression of the seasons and the natural order of vegetation and agriculture. Ancient Greeks initially recognized only 3 seasons: spring, summer, and autumn. Thus, initially, only 3 Horae represented the seasons of the year, as well as the stage of plant growth that marked off and measured each season. Thallo, goddess of spring. Thallo was the Horae goddess of buds and green shoots, associated with spring, and worshipped as the goddess responsible for granting prosperity in planting and protecting new growth. Her Roman equivalent was the goddess Flora. She was worshipped heavily in Athens and was specifically invoked in the citizens' oath of that city. As a spring goddess, she was also naturally associated with flowers, so it should be no surprise that blooms feature prominently in depictions of her. Oxo, goddess of summer. Her sister Oxo was the Horae goddess of summer. As a goddess associated with plant growth and fertility, she would frequently be depicted in art as bearing a sheaf of grain. Like Thallo, she was worshipped mainly in Athens, although Greeks in the Argolis region worshipped her as well. And while she was numbered among the Horae, she is also recorded, including in Athens, as one of the Charites, or Graces, alongside Hegemony and Demia among others. It's worth noting that in this aspect she was called Ophkassesia rather than Oxo, and her association was with spring growth rather than summer, which hints at the sometimes murky web of Horae associations and depictions. Carpo, goddess of autumn. The last of this trio of Horae was Carpo, the goddess of autumn. Associated with the harvest, she may have been a revised version of the Greek harvest goddess Demeter. Indeed, one of Demeter's titles was Carpophore, or fruit-bearer. Like her sisters, she was worshipped in Athens. She was typically depicted as bearing grapes or other fruits of the harvest. An alternate version of this triad was composed of Carpo and Oxo, designated simply as the personification of growth, alongside a different Greek goddess, Hegemony, who symbolized autumn. She was alternately described as the daughter of a few different Greek gods: Zeus, Helios, or Apollo. Hegemony, whose name means queen or leader, was considered chief among the Charites rather than a Horae, as noted by Pausanias in his Descriptions of Greece, Book 9, Chapter 35, which describes Carpo, but not Oxo, as a Charite as well. Associations of the triad goddesses. Both triads of Horae make various cameo appearances throughout Greek mythology. The Justice Triad, highlighting their association with spring, were described in Orphic Hymn 47 as escorting Persephone on her journey from the underworld each year.